السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هو كريم دانس المعروف باسمه الفني لوكي، فنان الهيب هوب البريطاني العراقي الاستثنائي الذي تتمحور أغانيه حول القضايا السياسية والاجتماعية. لا تكاد تسمع صوت لوكي حتى يستحوذ على انتباهك على الفور. موسيقاه تشدك للإنصات إليها وتحرك كلماته عقلك بثقافته الرفيعة والرسائل الواعية. انطلق في عالم موسيقى الراب وكتابة الأنشودات وهو في 12 من عمره، وعلى الرغم من نجاحه وشعبيته في وقت مبكر من حياته المهنية، فقد قرر التوقف عن الأعمال والإنتاجات الموسيقية من عام 2011 حتى عام 2016 للتركيز على الدراسة، حيث ذهب إلى فلسطين ليعيش معاناة الفلسطينيين اليومية ويشهد على احتلال العدو الإسرائيلي المتوحش. بانقطاعه في عام 2011 أغضب لوكي متابعيه، وبعودته مع إطلاق Soundtrack to Struggle 2 منحهم الأمل والصمود والدعم العاطفي بحسب المتابعين. من المحتمل أيضا أنه ساعد في تصور ورسم الجيل القادم من الذين قد يغيرون العالم. منذ عودته إلى نشاطه الفني لاقى 2 من تسجيلاته، أحمد وأشباح غرينفيل، اللذان يقاربان مواضيع تتعلق بكيفية تعامل أوروبا مع أزمة اللاجئين والمأساة في برج غرينفيل على التوالي استحسانا واسعا. هذا هو النوع من النهج الإنساني وعمق السردية والسياق التاريخي الذي اشتهر به فنان الراب اللافت للنظر والأذن لوكي، حتى بات من الأصوات التي لا بد من أن نستمع إليها في هذا الزمن الكالح، حيث تلقى كلماته صدى لدى الجماهير من متابعيه ومعجبيه. أهلا بكم إلى الحلقة الثانية مع لوكي من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا.
Now, when I say free, free, I want you to say Palestine so loud that they hear you in the Israeli embassy. No, I want you to say Palestine so loud that they hear you in Al-Quds. No, I want you to say Palestine so loud that they hear you in Gaza. Are you with me? Free, free, Palestine! Free, free, Palestine! Free, free.
British Iraqi hip-hop artist Loki, one of the most prominent rappers, well known for his political activism, often represented in his music, known for his tongue-twisting flows and conscious message. Welcome again to من الداخل from the inside, Loki.
شكرا على المقدمة.
Pure pleasure always. Well, Loki, during your period of hiatus in 2012, you have traveled and lived for a while in occupied Palestine and immersed yourself in the gardens of knowledge there, both in academia and experiencing what life is like under the brutal tyranny of the Israeli occupation. How much has this contributed towards gaining a certain degree of wisdom that may have not been previously unlocked and molded your perception of Palestine or the Palestinian cause?
Well, firstly, I would think it would be important to say that when I am or was there, I was carrying a passport that represents Wa'ad Balfour, so my experience of the situation is certainly not anywhere near the same as Palestinians whose freedom of movement is completely limited in many different ways. Also, in addition to that, you have to remember that the majority of Palestinians, 1 in 3 every refugees in the world is Palestinian. The majority of Palestinians are not able to practice their right under UN Resolution 194, which is to return home. Mm-hmm. So I was very much aware. True. Yeah, I was very much aware that this was a privileged position to be in. I think the effect that understanding the material consequences of Zionism has on you is always an important thing. Obviously, I am known to the the Zionist entity. So I was detained for many hours. I was questioned at length about lyrics of my songs and things of that nature. And I was surprised when I was allowed to enter, to be honest. Since then, a blacklist has been leaked by the government in the state of Israel, which says that those who belong to the Organization of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, of which I am a patron, will not be allowed to enter. So I imagine that that will never happen again. I'll never be able to go back there. But of course, it's important for us to understand that we are one hand. You know, what happens in Palestine has a relation to what happens here. When you look at Tommy Robinson and Katie Hopkins, two of the most prominent racists in this country, they are funded by the very same organizations that fund Elad and Sheikh Jarrah. So we have far more in common than is often understood by people in this country, I would say.
Well, there are many countries that you can't go to, I believe. Israel and the United States of America, right?
Well, last time I attempted, I was booked for a show in the US, and I was informed that my travel to the United States was not authorized by the US government.
So that tells the message, Loki.
Yes, and I'm certain that in the US, well, I'm not certain, but I suspect in the US context, it is related to the artistic output, I imagine.
Right.
I imagine.
Right. You have researched and written about how the mobile phone plays a vital role as an instrument of cultural violence against Palestinians. Tell us more, please.
Well, it's not just cultural violence, it's 5 ways in which it invisibilizes functions of the occupation. So there is the economic violence of it from the point where Palestinian phone companies have to operate basically under the auspices of the Israeli government. Off the back of Oslo, you know, at that time you had a very small percentage of Palestinian society that were connected to phone lines. But with Oslo, it was the kind of neoliberalization of the Palestinian economy and the use of the Palestinian population as a captive market, mainly for companies that had to act in concert with the Israeli government. And so one of those things is, of course, the phone. In terms of surveillance, we know that all of the building material that is used to build the phone lines in Palestine has to go through IDF military inspection. Yes. They have access to it, essentially.
That's very true. Allow us, Loki, to stop now for a short break with a compilation of your video clips. Stay tuned, Loki. إذا فاصل موسيقي قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا.
Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. List the things I love, I couldn't ever begin. From the giggle when you're happy to the smell of your skin. Every day you surprise me with intelligent things, ready for all blessings and lessons your development brings. I learn more from you than you could ever learn from me. First step, first word, first time I heard you breathe. 12 months, no arrest made. The image in our head stayed. Stressed faces press the windows looking for an escape. Seems they underestimate this corner of the West Way. Witnesses to the crime, we fear a whitewash is the end game. Minister, what was your relationship with Mark Allen? Been waiting 12 months for answers, still we can't have them. Windows to our souls, witness anguish that you can't fathom. No disrespect intended, troubled water wasn't our anthem. Carnival on the soul of Kelso Cochrane. What you think would develop on the strength of those names over 70? Everyday people, no celebrities. We're left here picking up people.
أهلا بكم من جديد. British Iraqi hip hop artist Loki, welcome back. Well, Loki, the recent victory of the Palestinians' prison break from the Jalboa high security prison, the humiliating defeat of Israel in the recent Sabre of Al-Quds operation. How do you read the outcome of the Palestinians' incessant victories of all Palestine and the calls for liberation from the river to the sea and the fatal blow, of course, to the so-called deal of the century? How do you read all this?
Well, it's very clear that المقاومة الفلسطينية has proven that the cost of Israel's military operations, specifically in Gaza, but even with the ethnic cleansing of Sheikh Jarrah, which has been facilitated by a quasi-government established by Oslo in the West Bank, is too much of an economic cost. And when the resistance was able to stop flights coming into the airport they call Ben Gurion, from when 65,000 construction workers in the state of Israel are Palestinians, and 99.9% of them refused to come in for 1 day. And the Israeli Builders Association claimed that just that 1 day of removing their labor cost the Israeli economy $40 million. Then what is clear is that Palestinians not only have been articulating their unfreedom for many, many years, but they are refusing the enforced fragmentation that the state of Israel has tried to impose upon them. And they are understanding the levers of power at which they can apply pressure, and the ways in which, when you look at the state of Israel, it has something like 25% of the doctors in it are Palestinians, something like 50% of the pharmacists are Palestinians. While Palestinians have largely been moved away from the agricultural sector and pushed towards the service industry, you have a few different pressure points that can be applied serious pressure to by the Palestinian resistance. It's not just a matter of pure might versus might. There are other ways in which we can shut down factories, even in this country. You saw a factory which produces weapons for Elbit Systems, the #1 arms company in the state of Israel. Let's not forget that Israel is the #1 arms exporter per capita in the world, meaning in relation to its population. A factory was shut down in this country for 6 days. The local community in Leicester came out and made sure the police were unable to remove those people that had shut down the factory. You even had the fire service called to come and remove those protesters that shut down the factory, and the fire service refused. We are living in a time of unprecedented solidarity, not just Palestinian to Palestinian, but between Palestinians and the rest of the world. It is vital.
International solidarity, true.
International. And it is vital that we cultivate a level of criticality when thinking about what Israel does. For example, there's an organization called Zodiac Maritime. Now, this was originally founded by Sami Ofer. He was a billionaire in the state of Israel who formerly served in the British Navy. He founded this shipping company, and in 2011 was largely scandalized by not only the Israeli media, but also the US government for supposedly trading with Iran. Well, after he died, what came out is that his ships not only were used to funnel agents into Iran to carry out assassinations, but also Zodiac Maritime was used in the assassination of the member of Hamas in Dubai. Now, this
محور.
very organization, محور, and this very organization is registered in Britain. And so recently, when you saw the Mercer Street be targeted in a drone attack, there was no knowledge in the media that this very company that operated this ship was a front for Israeli intelligence. Now, it is vital that we continue to assert the very basic facts of the matter. We must not allow ourselves to be dragged in many different directions, as we saw with the Corbyn movement in this country. The #1 organization that mobilized against Jeremy Corbyn in this country, the Board of Deputies, has recently come out in its own trustees report and admitted it has a close working relationship with the Israeli embassy, and that it has strengthened links with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the IDF. We have to continue to assert these facts.
Thank you always, Loki, for trying always, not just through your music, but also your discourse and bringing this matter to the surface. Obviously, you are the voice of the, not the voiceless, but the conveniently unheard. Previously, Loki, you turned down an appearance on the show of Tim Westwood, Britain's most popular hip-hop radio/TV host, after he was used as a propaganda tool by the BBC to promote the British occupation of Afghanistan. Today, on Afghanistan, you say that it's great that the world is concerned for human rights in the country, but where have they been for the last 20 years? And you've titled your article, Good Riddance to the War on Terror. How do you read the ramifications of what is happening now in Afghanistan?
Well, what has to be made abundantly clear is that the invasion of Afghanistan was in and of itself the cause of a humanitarian crisis. 5.3 million people were displaced. Across the war on terror, 37 million people have been displaced. It has entailed the dropping of 46 bombs every single day by the US or their coalition partners. What we have seen is the very same companies that benefited from the war in Afghanistan, like Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems, those very, very same companies have also benefited from the building up and militarization of EU borders and US borders and the stopping of refugees reaching them. When we look at what Afghanistan functioned to do, is it functioned to take money out of the public purse of Britain, the United States and other NATO countries and put it into transnational private security, intelligence and military industrial complex in the world. We are talking about companies like Veritas Capital, who DynCorp, their mercenary organization in Afghanistan was, and I'm sorry to use this word, but DynCorp was found to be using sex slaves in Afghanistan, in this country, okay? This is a US company funded by the US taxpayer. How is it that this nation, which has brought so much suffering to the majority of the world through needless war, you have US military bases in the majority of the world. Counter-terror operations have affected 85 different countries. US special forces in 85 different countries. Over 1,000 military bases in the rest of the world. We don't need to live like this anymore.
Sure.
And with the projection that the United States will go from being the world's #1 economy to the second economy within the next 10 years, this will bring a welcome change. The parameters of their logic will be imposed upon them. They will no longer be able to project themselves in the violent ways that they have in the last 40 to 50 years.
Well, Loki, you have always mixed music with politics or socio-political messages. You have witnessed the Grenfell Tower fire disaster on the 14th of June in 2017, which resulted in the death of more than 80 people, to which you have dedicated a very powerful song, Ghosts of Grenfell, in honor of the victims. This sparked a storm. Tell us more, please.
Well,
And it
originally,
seems that the mainstream media, Loki, was part and parcel of this kind of storm.
Well, originally, the estimation of the government was that it was over 80 people, but recently it was not recently, but in the last few years, it was put down to 72 people that it is estimated died in Grenfell Tower. What Grenfell and the fire at Grenfell was a culmination of a bipartisan orthodoxy of neoliberal necro-politics. You have consecutive governments who have had loyalty to this idea that private companies are better suited to handle the functions of state than the state is itself, meaning that the very companies that put the flammable materials on Grenfell, Celotex, for example, their technical director was an advisor to the housing minister, Sajid Javid, at the time on building regulations, meaning essentially that these companies are able to regulate themselves and in their own interests. So now you have a situation where the flammable
So it's corruption.
Yes, it's corruption the British way, of course. And the point is that within British society today, conflict of interest and corruption is not an aberration of the system. It is the system. And it's just the PR which is better and can achieve hegemony more easily because of a uniform dedication to this very same notion among most of the media. But the point about the cladding is that you have it on hospitals, you have it on cinemas, you have it on schools, you have it on blocks all across the country. You even have flammable insulation made by one of the same companies that put flammable materials on Grenfell on a primary school less than a mile away from Grenfell. So clearly what you see is that the very people who are the problem are being seen as the solution within British society today. And actually, those deaths at Grenfell Tower, unfortunately, have changed very, very little in British society.
In 30 seconds, Loki, what inspires you when you come to write your song? What state of mind you are in? A state of rage, of power, of love, of whatever?
What inspires me is understanding where we are today and the present as a product of historical struggles, which many different people dedicated their entire lives to and may not have seen the fruits of their labor before they died. Understanding the dynamics in which we already live as a product of collective bargaining of the past and people collectivizing their resources and their power to push back. And also what inspires me is knowing that we will win. And that, as Thomas Paine said, time converts more than reason. And as we are pushing forward towards a better future. History favors the trailblazers.
Sure.
It does not favor those that cling to the status quo.
Excellent. Well, the musical inventiveness of your albums and messages showcased your ability to create music that was food for both the ears and the mind. British Iraqi hip-hop legend Loki, thank you very much for your terrifically intellectual insights and for being such a genuine artist and a genuine human being.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our absolute pleasure to have you always. ودائما الشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا، وحتى نلتقي من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.